By now, we have spent enough time understanding Spring Security, user management interfaces, class, and default implementations provided by Spring Security, like in-memory user details manager, JDBC user details manager, and we also saw like what is the importance of user details, where it maintains the contract and schema of the user, and what is user detail service and what is user details manager. So as of now, we aligned ourselves with the Spring framework and we use JDBC User Details Manager and in-memory details user manager to perform authentication. But in this video, let's try to create our own custom table as per our requirement and change Spring security behavior by implementing user detail service where I can tell Spring Framework these are my table and these are my column names which are not similar to what you are maintaining inside Spring Framework, but still I want to leverage them to perform authentication. So for that, let's quickly go ahead and create a new table in the database. I'm just running use EasyBank, and now I'm creating a new table. Here the table name is customer and I have an email and password which I intentionally put the column name as PWD, and instead of authorities I just put it as role. Suppose that I will insert a row also for our testing purpose. I'm inserting one email which is jando@example.com followed by password also. This time I changed to reverse 54321 and the role is admin. So now we have a new table and we also inserted a record inside that. So one thing that you have to observe here is we are not following Spring security conventions. Like my table name is not user, it is customer. And at the same time, I don't have username and password columns, but instead I have my own columns like email and PWD, which indicates password of the user. So now let's go to the code and try to do some changes adherent to the new table that we have created. For that, we are going to use JPA repository framework to perform CRUD operations onto the database. If you are aware of JPA, it's more than enough. But if you are new to the JPA, there is no worry here. I will make sure that you are understanding whatever is needed for Spring security perspective. So the very first thing that I have to do is in JPA, I have to create a Pojo class which indicate or represents a database table. So in this scenario, my table name is customer. So I made my class name also customer. And whenever you mark @entity, so this represents Spring Boot and JPA that this class is a representation of a database table with the name customer. And at the same time, we have declared in the database ID as a auto generated and primary key. That's where I have used these two annotations which tell JPA framework that this is a primary key and you have to generate sequence number whenever we are trying to insert a new record into the database for this customer table. Suppose that we should also create Java variables similar to column names where I am just maintaining the same names like email, PWD, and role. If there is a change in the name, then JPA cannot detect to which column you are trying to refer. But if there is a scenario where you want to maintain a different Java variable name and different database column name, there is always a @column annotation which you can leverage to mention which column you are speaking about. But in this scenario, since we are good to go with whatever we have created in the database, I'm just keeping the same way. And post that we should have a getters and setters for that customer table. Now we have created a JPA representation of my customer table. Now I should have a repository also. So in JPA, we have CRUD repository, JPA repository, which are the classes and interfaces which will help me to perform CRUD operations onto my table. So in this scenario, I'm creating a interface called customer repository, which extends CRUD repository provided by Spring JPA framework. Here I have to give an indication that this repository is specific to customer table. That's why go and use the customer Pojo class, that or entity class that I have created previously, and the primary key is of type long. The beauty of JPA is you don't have to write methods, SQL statements to fetch records or to update or insert records. For example, here I just wanted to fetch records from my customer table based upon email of the user. So here my customer repository already knows this is the table name, and when I say find by email, so JPA internally will generate a implementation of this abstract method, and it will build a SQL statement with a where condition having email is equal to so and so, whatever input we are providing. So that's the beauty of JPA. So here I'm saying find by email. If I say find by email and password, then since there is an and condition in my method name, so JPA is smart enough to detect that where condition should have both email and password. And the return type of this method is list of customers. We may get one customer or more than one customer based upon an email. So now we have implemented the repository, and at the same time we have an entity class. So we have enough JPA details to fetch records from customer table. Next, as we are discussing in the previous videos, Spring Framework can't understand users details that we provide. Like here I'm just having a user details in terms of customer, but Spring Security can't understand that. In order to make our Spring Security to understand, we should always create a class which implements user details interface. For that, I have created the same customer with a different name, security customer, which implements user details. So obviously, whenever we are implementing user details, we have to override all these methods and implement like what is a get password, get username, is account non-expired. So by default for all of them, I have put true because in our application, we don't have a requirement to perform some logic to indicate whether the account is logged or expired or enabled. So that's why for now these methods always indicates and returns true value. That means there is no negative action will be performed on the user. Now on top of that we have three important methods, which is get username, get password and get authorities. So these are the methods will be called by Spring Security while performing authentication operation. So for that what I have done is I have wrapped my customer object or class inside this, and whoever want to create a user which can be understand by Spring Security, they have to call this security customer by using it constructor along with the customer Pojo object that we have created previously. So once we have done that, I'm saying password you can get by going into the get pwd column, and at the same time username also I'm saying you can get by going to get email. That means though we are following two different naming conventions, like Spring Security always expect you to maintain your user credentials as username and password spelling, but here we are maintaining it as email and pwd. So this is how you have to tell framework, though I am maintaining different naming conventions, you can go ahead and use these details present inside a customer. Similarly, for authorities, we are taking roles inside customer and converting them into granted authority and returning to the Spring framework. So now we have user representation of our customer table also, which is security customer. Now what I will do is I will go ahead and implement user detail service as per requirement. So in this scenario, I'm not implementing user details manager because I don't have a requirement of creating, deleting, updating, or changing password, such requirements in my application. I always have a requirement to validate the user is proper or not. So that's why I just going with user detail service, but you are free to do some hands-on on user details manager and you can implement all other methods provided by it. But here I can show you how we can implement one method. The similar ways you can easily adopt for other methods inside user details manager if we have such requirement. And we can always refer sample implementations of JDBC user details manager, LDAP, in memory as a reference whenever you have such requirements to implement user details manager. So here I have only one method inside it, which is load user by username. And this method will always return user details type object. So here my framework knows that I have an sample user detail service implementation, and that's where it will always use this as a current user details and it will never go to the default implementations. So since there are a couple of things that framework will take care. In this scenario, since I'm implementing user detail service, this EasyBank user detail service will be the current implementation and it will call load user by username at runtime. And at the same time, since security customer which implements user details, it will consider this is the user representation for this application. So once we have that call is happening, we take that username and we call our find by email, which is inside our repository interface, and that will go ahead and look into the database with the email and will give me a customer list objects. Since in this scenario we always have only one object, I am just calling security customer constructor by passing the first customer that I am getting from the list, and it will return the same, and framework will not complain because my security customer is implemented by user details only. That's why there is no complaint. And at the same time, if I don't have any results, I should always throw this exception, which is user name not found exception, which indicates to framework that this user is not a valid user and we should not accept his credentials and stop his access to the application by throwing a bad credentials error, which is a 401 authentication error. So now we have done enough configurations. Let's try to go to project security config and comment this, because right now we don't need this. We have implemented our own custom user detail service, and in the easy backend application, which is the main application, I have added these two which are specific to JPA. So enable JPA repositories will scan for all repositories present inside your application. So in this scenario, we have a customer repository, and entity scan annotation will help you to scan all our entities associated with the database tables. And we have customer is such an entity. That's why we have to give these two configurations since they are in the separate package compared to what this main class present. Now we are good to go. I will go ahead and start the server in debug mode, clicking on debug as Java application. So before that, I'll also keep a breakpoint in this method to confirm that framework is calling this method only for doing authentication. So now our server also started. Let's go to browser and try to perform a login onto the application. So I have called slash my account service, which will redirect me to login page. Here, first, let me call with some random credentials, which is admin 12345, and the call is happening to my method. So in this scenario, there is no user with the username admin. If you see in database, we maintain email details, but here we are getting a different value. So this should return 0 customers, which will satisfy this if condition. So, and it will throw an username not found exception, which will result into a bad credentials error on the UI. Now, let me give proper credentials which you have maintained in the database, which is John Doe example.com followed by his password is 54321. Again, the breakpoint will stop here. So this time, let's see, we should get a response with a valid customer. There you go. We have one customer details and his email and password, everything. What we do is we just typecast our customer into a security customer and return to framework, and framework will validate and will give a response of my account service. This is how we have to implement in a scenario where you want to customize your Spring Security framework as per your requirements. So in this scenario, I just showed you how to override and implement user detail service. It applicable same for user details manager also. In the case of user details manager, you will take responsible of creating an user, updating, deleting, everything. So that truly depends upon application to application what you want to override. If you have any questions, please post in the Q&A, but I sincerely advise you to follow me and do coding along with me. I'm not typing the code in the course. The reason is that will delay or extend the time of this entire course, and few people may feel bored if I type each and every letter inside the course. That's why I'm making sure of explaining each and every code line that I am writing. But I would always recommend you to pause the video and do the same coding inside your own laptop so that you understand how the things are working. And at the same time, I'm also attaching the code that we have developed to the course of sections every time we are done with a specific section. So please download that, take them as a reference, and see if we are getting any different errors or issues. But I would always advise you to do practice on your own while watching this course. Thank you and see you in the next section. Bye.